BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. It is Monday. Welcome to the show, another Zodiac Monday. And today we're going to be talking about the Lake Herman Road murders that took place on December 20th of 1968. But I need to make the announcement that in the near future for Zodiac Mondays, we're going to be talking about both the Domingos Edwards case as well as the Swindle murders, and the possibilities about how these crimes could be Zodiac related. And I was reading Michael Cole's book recently, Zodiac Revisited Volume 3, and we have a couple episodes about that here on this channel. He puts forward the theory that he believes that all of those crimes, the Domingos Edwards case, the Swindle murders, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, as well as the Zodiac Killer murders that have been attributed in the canonical sense, were all committed by the same person, that being the Zodiac Killer. When it comes to the beginning of the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror, years of operation, there is not an established consensus about this among everybody, because some people do indeed think that it started in 1963 with the murders of Domingos and Edwards at Gaviota, with our people who think that the Zodiac Killer crimes went even further back to 1962 with the murder of Ray Davis. Some people would say that it happened in 66 with Sherry Jo Bates. And then even the people who think that the Zodiac simply operated within a 12-month span from 1968 to 69, beginning with the Lake Herman Road murders on December 20th of 1968. One point that's very important to remember is that if you look at something in the future, like moving forward in time to 1970, you would have the Kathleen Johns incident. This is the attempted abduction off of Highway Route 132, and in this instance, the perpetrator was unsuccessful. He was trying to do something, he was trying to commit a crime against Kathleen Johns, but was unsuccessful. So even if you're going to include all of those crimes and incidents that we mentioned going back to 1962 with the murder of Ray Davis, well, is it not possible that some crime took place before that, where the perpetrator was simply just unsuccessful, that someone had attempted a murder, but they didn't get away with it? Just some food for thought. But as you can see, this is also a Q&A session where I'm going to read off your questions and comments, and we're going to have a discussion. We will still be doing the regular AMA on Wednesday and Ask Me Anything, so if you have any other questions or ideas about the Zodiac Killer, true crime, serial killers, please drop those in the comments section below. In fact, any subject is fair game, any type of question. But in regards to the Lake Herman Road murders, I'm going to go over to an episode that was from December 20th of 2021. Got a little bit stuck in the backtrack. Yes, December 20th, 2020 is actually the date that I meant to say, because that's when we did the anniversary post for the Lake Herman Road murders. And the first comment comes to us from Classic Chevy Cat Black. By the way, I'm just going to call you Chevy Cat Black from now on. It kind of rolls off the tongue a little bit more easily. Chevy Cat Black says, I know nothing about marksmanship. Someone mentioned below that taping a light to a rifle works. With that being said, I'd like to know what the weather was like on December 20th of 1968. Wouldn't you have to have had a fairly bright moon to shoot at a silhouette? I live in a rural area. When there is a silver moon, you cannot see anything in front of you. Robert Graysmith could have been correct when he went to Lake Herman Road and said he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. That's what happened to me where I live. I wonder if it was foggy that night. Great show as usual, Ned. Hey, thank you so much, Chevy Cat Black. But in regards to the silhouette, what happened with that, as I understand, is that the investigator, Les Lundblad from Lake Herman Road, said that the perpetrator would not have needed a flashlight taped onto his gun, because Betty Lou Jensen would have been running away from the car in the parking lot at Lake Herman Road, and her body would have been silhouetted against the sky, so then the person could see the black outline of Betty Lou Jensen's body, and that's how the perpetrator was able to fire the gun at her as she was moving away. I mean, a lot of people will dispute that, but In regards to the flashlight, the Zodiac Killer wrote in a letter about Lake Herman Road saying that he taped a pencil flashlight to the gun, the 22 caliber gun that was used. Pencil was misspelled in the letter Pencel, but Ammo 8 has wanted to weigh in on that, and I'm not exactly a firearms expert, but Ammo 8 wants to share some first-hand firearms knowledge and says, I am an old man and have lived a long life, and I'm a lifelong shooter. There's absolutely no difference between the 22 caliber ammunition for a 22 caliber semi-automatic pistol, revolver, or semi-automatic rifle. The ammunition is the same. I remember seeing some pictures of Winchester Super X casings recovered at one of the sites. They are plain Jane 22 caliber long rifle ammunition sold everywhere. The idea of using a rifle versus a pistol is interesting. The force of a 22 caliber bullet out of a rifle is considerably more powerful than that from a pistol. It's a far more deadly thing due to the velocity being so much faster. Taping a flashlight to a firearm is an old poacher's trick. It does work. This was a common practice with raccoon hunters as they hunted at night. I'm surprised that no one has identified the type of firearm used. The marks left on the shell by the firing pin are fairly distinct by firearm type. Ruger, Remington, Colt, all are different. And I think the Zodiac said that the brand of ammo used at Lake Herman Road was Super X, but just my memory's a little bit foggy. In terms of visibility, I don't think there's any question about it, whether you have the pencil flashlight or the silhouette against the sky, or the perpetrator just was actually perhaps much closer to David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen than people had originally believed. But in regards to the Lake Herman Road shooting, I think that this crime is a little bit different than that of the other Zodiac Killer murders, because there was no survivor. There were no witnesses. And, I mean, there's no one there to tell the tale. There's no one there to share any more pieces of information. If you look at the Blue Rock Springs shooting, for example, on July 4th of 1969, firstly, Mike Mageau survived the shooting. I mean, and he can talk about the events, what happened. He may not be a credible witness, but he is still a witness all the same. And the second thing is, we have a little bit more of an understanding about what happened. Now, Mike Mageau and Darlene Ferrin may have been having an affair, but Darlene Ferrin was, of course, married to somebody else, and the motivation for being in the park, as far as we understand now, was most likely to purchase drugs, and maybe Mike Mageau wanted to sell some stolen goods to somebody, but like a pillowcase full of stolen material from people's houses, Mike Mageau being a cat burglar, that is. But in regards to drugs, Darlene Ferrin's brother said that she went to the park to pick up some marijuana for him, and I think to get some pills for her sister, but that's another thing where I don't want to say too much because I might misstate some of the details. But going to that park to buy drugs, it's not about having any type of secret rendezvous with someone in a mysterious way. It could very well they could have been in the park to have purchased something like narcotics. However, what people really want to focus in on is not so much why was this man and this woman in the car at Blue Rock Springs. Instead, they want to be like, were they killed by the Zodiac Killer, or were they killed by somebody else, and then this person just took credit for it in the letters? With Lake Herman Road, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, I mean, those questions are so much more larger. They're more powerful, because what were they doing in the parking lot? How did all of this happen, and how did all of this come about? So on December 20th, 1968, what's happening? First, we know that David Faraday, the male victim at Lake Herman Road, had a dispute with somebody who was allegedly dealing drugs at his school, and that David is very much opposed to that. He's anti-drug, and he has a dispute with this other student, and they're in this type of confrontation, and we don't necessarily know all of the events of that, but one of the things that has been shared about Lake Herman Road as well is that night, in the vicinity of that parking lot at Lake Herman Road, there was also a drug bust that went on, and many people do believe that some way, somehow, Lake Herman Road was a drug-related homicide. either that or that Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that the Zodiac killer, this psychotic, cold, methodical, and calculating individual, just showed up and killed them because of creating a criminal masterpiece. Now, I was on Evan from Texas's channel, and if you haven't seen his videos yet, they're excellent. Once again, Evan from Texas, and I wrote in a comment there. Normally, I don't want to read off comments from somebody else's show, but because it was my comment, and then he replied to it, I thought that we could go through these here for the Q&A. And I wrote, "Good episode, Evan, but I have a question. I can understand why David Faraday would be at Lake Herman Road, or in the vicinity of that drug bust, but why would he bring Betty Lou with him? It was on their first date. I know you said we may never have the answer, but what do you think was the reason for driving his date to that parking lot?" Now, to provide a little bit of context for this, there are people out there who still to this day believe that Lake Herman Road was a lover's lane. And then there are other people out there who believe that Lake Herman Road was not a lover's lane at all, that it was too close to the road to actually provide anybody the opportunity for intimacy and privacy. Well, then what was it for? It seems that it could have been a place where people would go for kind of like a quick exchange with drugs or something, a drug point, for lack of a better term. And I think in both of those instances, it doesn't really matter too much because teenagers would go to that parking lot, and teenagers were familiar with that. And we know this because there was a different couple that showed up earlier that night, and the guy got out to get under the hood, tinker with the motor of the car, which was a relatively new car at the time, as I understood. They were kind of taking out the new sports car for a drive, and a suspicious vehicle pulls into Lake Herman Road, and he's bothered by it so much that he gets in the car and drives away, and the suspicious vehicle follows him. Okay, so then that means that teenagers were familiar with this. Lake Herman Road, we're talking about the parking lot, which is the entrance to the Benicia water pumping station road. Like there's like a type of fence / barrier there that becomes the entrance to the water pumping station road. So this parking lot area is on a shortcut in between Benicia and Vallejo. And this was something that people would use very frequently when they're trying to drive in between the two towns, and it's a stopover point. I mean, we can discuss the terminology all the time, but why would Betty Lou Jensen be there? And this isn't even my own original observation. It comes to us from Chevy Cat Black. She wrote it in one of the episodes, saying that, I mean, just that. I can understand why David Faraday would be there, whether he has a dispute with a drug dealer and they want to settle the score, whether he ended up being an informant and he turned over some information that got some people busted and he just wanted to see what happened. But why bring a girl with him for that on their first date? I mean, why would he bring a girl around thugs or something and be like, "Hey, baby, do you want to see some sirens?" I mean, what really would be the motivation? And Evan from Texas made an attempt to answer this, which is a pretty good one, when he says, "That's a damn good question, Ned. As you pointed out, I don't know the answer, but Debbie, David's sister, stated he was going to Lake Herman Road that night because a bunch of kids were going out there that night. She also said she knew some of the kids were referring to David, but it is unknown if that was ever followed up. But according to the police files, someone alleged that David had gone to Ricky's school." That's a guy that I like to call Richard Ricky Blank. I saw his name written that way one time, and I think that that is a good way to refer to him. So he is someone who could be involved with the this crime much more heavily than we know. But Richard Ricky Blank could have been there to have words with him the day he was killed. That means David. Maybe this tipster was mistaken, but maybe that wasn't true. I don't know why a person would make that up, but maybe. Melody also provided information that Betty Lou was afraid of Ricky and that Ricky was going to beat David with brass knuckles. I think we need to interject there because Richard Grinnell sent me an interview with Thomas Henry Horan. I think it was called Zodiac Killer Named, or Naming the Zodiac, something like that. It was from a channel that I didn't recognize. And that was one thing I heard there about how David Faraday has this dispute with somebody at school, right, over the drug dealing, and there's supposed to be a fight on December 20th, 1968. Not at the time they were murdered, like in the late hours of the evening. No, there's supposed to be a fight earlier in the day, but the other guy chickens out because David Faraday he's anti-drug, right? He's a clean-cut, God and Country Eagle Scout, but he is also a wrestler and somewhat of a tough guy, and the other guy doesn't want to fight him. So hearing this here about how, okay, that guy wants to kind of even the score a little bit, kind of bring in an equalizer, so he's going to jump David at night with brass knuckles. That makes perfect sense to me, how all of those things could fall in line. Not saying that that guy is the murderer, the shooter, or anything like that, just talking about the reasons why David Faraday would be going to the parking lot. And Ricky unsurprisingly denied all of this, but I have to wonder, could the two of them have been in that parking lot to have a confrontation? Ricky, who was already something of a criminal on probation, is supposed to have had what others call a good, solid alibi for the time of the murder. As it seems, at his house, people were able to account for him and his whereabouts until about 11 p.m., with Ricky claiming that he went to bed at 11:30. I don't know if I'd call that a good alibi. People simply said, oh, yeah, he was home up in his bed and he was asleep. Well, I mean, whose family is not going to say that? I mean, with me, all of that will always be true. Hey, what were you doing December 20th of any year? I was at home. Yeah. But I digress from that. Maybe all of this is true, and yet investigators still wanted to submit a polygraph, or they wanted him to submit to a polygraph, begging the question, if he had such a good alibi, why would they need to do that? I think that that's kind of a flimsy alibi, unless there's some layer to this that I'm not quite certain of, but just saying that the family says that he was at home. I mean, people don't always want to give up their family member to law enforcement. Now, what were they going to ask him if it's so obvious that he wasn't the shooter? Well, what were they going to ask him? And talk about question and answer. I can answer that question right there. Was the shooter at Lake Herman Road someone who was involved with the drug trade? I mean, that would be my first instinct, and I have little reason to doubt that that's what they did. We're just going back to the comment now, being clear. What exactly did they tell one another? Could they have planned to meet each other off of Lake Herman Road for a showdown? Okay, at this point, some people think that Lake Herman Road was Lover's Lane, right? They said that they're going there for privacy and intimacy. And other people think that it's just this. The showdown, as we just said, about how this guy, I mean, Ricky, or even somebody else who could have been affiliated with this little group of individuals who's kind of like a gang, could have showed up at the parking lot to have the fight. Because as we said, if it is true that David was up for the fight earlier in the day and the other guy backed down, that means that David is up for the fight. Does he want to show off in front of Betty Lou, make her think that he is a tough guy or something like that? But I'm not really sure. Back to the comment. Now, this is speculation. All we have are the pages that were released, but given the framework of Zodiac, we've always been told their murder has been explained by some random act of a serial killer. I agree with that. The mainstream narrative is that this was the random act of a serial killer, or that even if it wasn't completely random, maybe there's a significance with the date, maybe there's a significance with the time, maybe there's a significance with, say, the zodiac signs, or the proximity to the winter solstice. Michael Cole even wrote that in his book Zodiac Revisited, when he's like, Lake Herman Road is right before the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year. This is a cold, methodical, and calculating serial killer who is trying to commit a crime on the darkest day of the year. And then the Zodiac is later going to reference Mount Diablo, and this guy's going to be like, all right, I am on top of Devil Mountain. I'm the epitome of evil. It's kind of like living out a fantasy. But that is just a different perspective on the subject, going in the absolute opposite direction, that Lake Herman Road was a drug-related set of murders, and instead saying that, yes, indeed, this is the cold, methodical, and calculating serial killer. But back to Evan's comment, but as we can see, there were suspects, there were motives, and anyone who thinks that these leads don't warrant further exploration are being a bit naive. At the very bottom of the list of causes of murders is indiscriminate actions of a lone psychopath, and it is interesting how a number of comments by others reveal the narrative of a Zodiac killer that is kind of a panacea, Panacea, I don't know what that is, sorry, for all the curiosities of this case. Why would someone want to randomly murder Faraday and Jensen? Because he was a psychotic killer? That's what most people think about Lake Herman Road, actually, and as well as Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa, and a little bit more than just a psychotic killer. But as we said, a very big theory in the Zodiac Killer mystery is somebody wanted to create a criminal masterpiece that is filled with mathematical signatures, references to literature. Someone is using things that are very personal to them, and they're also hiding in plain sight. Like when we went through the poem The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, and there's that line about leaving a taxi throbbing and waiting. Well, that sounds a lot like the murder of Paul Stein and perhaps the murder of Ray Davis. And they're just all of these references to literature and music, like the songs from the Mikado, Gilbert and Sullivan, as well as mathematics, of course. And that's one of the points that Gareth Penn and other people like Douglas Oswell and Mark Hewitt all want to really reemphasize, is that there are mathematical clues and signatures in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And is it possible that both of those things could be in conjunction? Yes, I mean, somebody were to work backward and then try and set the mathematical parameters after the fact, after the crimes had already been committed, but still that would require the existence of a psychopathic serial killer. And if you can't tell by now, Evan supports the Zodiac hoax theory, more or less. Okay, but next question here, and these are great, to do a Q&A and just have all the questions written out. Why would a killer call the cops on themselves? Because he was a psychotic killer. That's what most people think, right? And when it comes to calling the cops, after the Lake Herman Road murders, to the best of my knowledge, there was no phone call. The phone calls came after the murders the murder of Darlene Ferrin. Mike Michaud survived the shooting. I was almost about to say the Blue Rock Springs murders, but after the murder of Darlene Ferrin on the 4th of July, and after the murder of Cecilia Shepard on September 27th of 69, with the Lake Berryessa stabbing. And being very clear about that, Cecilia Shepard passed away 2 days later in the hospital, but she didn't die immediately. But after the stabbing of Cecilia Shepard, those are when the phone calls come in. And someone wanted me to reemphasize a point once, that did the perpetrator during those phone calls say, "I am the Zodiac," or "This is the Zodiac speaking"? And I'm forced to admit, no, they did not. Now here's one. Why would the perpetrator make notes of the cardinal direction of the victims' bodies? The Zodiac wrote in a letter saying the famous thing, "I'm going to state some facts that only I and the police know," that the male victim had his feet toward this direction, and the female victim had her body facing this direction. Why would the perpetrator make note of that? I mean, one possibility is that somebody's reading the police reports and they're learning this information secondhand, meaning that they weren't actually there, but once again, they're obtaining the info from the police reports. Another possibility is that the perpetrator had a very sharp, very intense memory and was just paying a lot of attention to this. You will experience that when you look through serial killer literature. I can agree with the statement that's already been written here by Evan, that it's not completely out of the ordinary for a psychopathic serial killer to exist, but it would be somewhat infrequent. They're definitely not as frequent as drug-related murders. Those things that would happen much more frequently. But when you look at a serial killer like Samuel Little, for example, who we don't even, I mean, his body count is off the charts, maybe 90 victims or something, but he had such an excellent memory and was able to draw and recreate things about each victim that he murdered. I mean, with psychopathic serial killers, as well, other people like Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer from Russia, same story. A very sharp memory, and he can really recall the details that are associated with the crimes that he committed. That is almost a hallmark of these quote-unquote serial killers, because, firstly, the reason why people have long-term memories is, and I don't mean to go off on some type of psychological neuroscience spiel, but the reason why people form long-term memories is because emotion connects with information. So says Dr. Google. And perhaps the Zodiac Killer was someone who was just very focused on this, and this is the most exhilarating thing of his entire life. If you're entertaining the idea of either a single perpetrator or some type of thrill kill club, not the hoax theory, that is, I mean, and this is going to be someone who's having the most exhilarating moment of their life. These were calculated thrill killings, for more or less, where someone is just trying to fuel their own ego and fuel their own desire for magnificence. I mean, it could be that, or this could have been a drug-related crime that the Zodiac took credit for. Now, here, going on to the next part of this, it's no wonder that headway happens in these investigations, but back to your comment, I completely admit I have no explanation for why both Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were there in that parking lot, but obviously I have doubts that it was a lover's lane due to the justification, or at least the way that it's been presented. Well, I have doubts to the lover's lane justification, or at least the way it's been presented. Just wanted to read that a little bit more clearly. And once again, please visit Evan from Texas's channel to watch his videos on the Zodiac Killer. Some great stuff about the Lake Herman Road murders. All right, and everybody, please stay tuned, and we will be back after this quick message. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to talk about some of the ways in which you can help Black Box Online Radio. This channel relies on your support, and the best way you can help out is just by listening to some more content. If you like what you hear, you can hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends on social media. But I should also say that Black Box Online Radio now has a Teespring page, and there will be some links in the description box. Please feel free to check out some of the merchandise that is available. Almost all sizes and colors are listed. So, you can also help out by going over to the Zodiac Killer channel and watching the documentary series Obsession into Darkness, parts 1, 2, and 3. I was one of the contributors for that, and you can see some other great Zodiac content on the Zodiac Killer channel. And yes, there will be a part 4 of Obsession into Darkness at some point in the future. And for now, let's get back to the show. Okay, hello everybody, welcome back. I think that it's important to remember that we may not have exact answers to everything in the Zodiac Killer mystery, such as the motivation for why Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday did exactly what they did. What many people are simply focused on is what was the killer doing rather than the victims. But because that road that connects Benicia and Vallejo is a shortcut and it has this stopover point where David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were, is it not possible that they simply just stopped there to have a conversation? And that's the real thing that Chevy Cat Black wanted to share with me, that there was a report about how David Faraday was in the possession of a ring. Is it possible that he simply did not want to go to the parking lot for any type of intense intimacy, but rather just to ask Betty Lou Jensen to be his steady girlfriend, and they were going to talk about that? I mean, if you want to count that as privacy, sure, not intimacy, but privacy, and then they got blindsided by the psychopath known as the Zodiac Killer. I mean, you do hear, though, that David Faraday's ratting out this guy for drugs, that there is a drug bust that is going on in the vicinity of the Lake Herman Road parking lot. It definitely does get you thinking, but many people just refuse to accept that as the exact alternative, and then instead they want to look at something to the contrary and be like, yes, indeed, there is the psychopathic serial killer that is out and looking for people at very opportune times, and that the victims aren't necessarily super important. But we did have a comment that came in recently, and I seem to have misplaced, or else I'd give the person a shout out. But what it was asking was, because of the similarities with the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting on July 4th, do you think that this was the work of a hitman? I mean, my first response is, this is somewhat of a larger theory out there, that the Zodiac murders were some type of assassin that is just using this as a moniker or a cover-up, or just putting out the guise of the Zodiac Killer, and the ciphers and the cryptograms, well, the ciphers slash cryptograms, we should say, and the letters is what I meant. The ciphers and the letters are really more of a ruse rather than anything that has deep meaning and actually giving away somebody's identity. It's food for thought. I'm definitely not completely sold on that. I wouldn't dismiss it 100%, but I don't really have enough to say that that's what I would genuinely believe. But when you look at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, you have somebody sneaking up on people in their cars and firing some gunshots and then just getting away from there. I mean, was this some type of drug-related crime or professional hit job, that there's some significant reason about David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen and they need to be taken out? I would need a lot more evidence before I could even begin to do an episode on that type of theory. But the word informant comes up very frequently in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And there are people out there who say that David Faraday was an informant. And they normally phrase it like a question. Is it possible that David Arthur Faraday was a confidential informant? As you heard, David Faraday was anti-drug. He's already has this dispute over somebody who's selling drugs at the school. He's very much opposed to that. And when you look at the word informant, one theory that we were discussing but last year on the channel was, could somebody, a law enforcement insider, have showed up at these places and betrayed the confidential informants of of the of like the SFPD or the Vallejo narcotics divisions? Could someone have betrayed the confidential informants? So yes, indeed, there is a psychopathic serial killer, but to answer that question, why are they targeting David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen? Well, David Faraday was a confidential informant, and someone knew that David was going to be at that location. He knew that David Faraday was going to be at that parking lot because of that a potential showdown. This person shows up early, bumps David and Betty Lou off, gets out of there, and then if any other criminals were going to come by, they would take the fall for it. They would get blamed for it. They would also be contaminating the crime scene with all of their evidence. We're talking about things like tire tracks and fingerprints if they touched anything. I mean, that's a possibility. Now, one other theory that people have put forward in the Lake Herman Road murders is that it's a full 180. That David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen did not go into that parking lot for intimacy or privacy or anything like that. Lake Herman Road was something where people allegedly sold drugs, right? Is it possible that David Faraday had been turned and that he was convinced to try marijuana for the first time? I mean, I think I read that on a forum once or twice, where some people saying were Betty Lou and David trying drugs for the first time. My only problem with that is that, I mean, crazier things have happened, and all of a sudden somebody gets persuaded into trying marijuana. But David is so anti-drug. He has a problem with this person dealing drugs at his school. It's possible that he provided information to someone else, and then that led to a drug bust that was going on. Or simply, he was very vocally opposed to using drugs. Once again, if you had some more evidence, like a letter that he had written, or even somebody who had, like, remembered conversations, yeah, David said, okay, he had been anti-drug in the past, but he was open to it, then maybe you would have another explanation. But the point is, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen ended up in that parking lot at Lake Herman Road, and then they were murdered, shot with a .22 caliber firearm. And this is one of the only instances in the confirmed canonical crimes when the victims may have been shot with a rifle. As I understand, it's almost widely accepted that they were shot with a .22 caliber pistol, but as Ammo 8 said, the ammo is practically identical. But I mean, it could have been possible that a rifle was used. I personally would have to say, if I had to make a determination right now, that they were shot with a pistol. But only because the Zodiac seemed to use handguns and the other crimes that were committed by firearm. No other incidents of the Zodiac using a rifle, but many people do believe that the Zodiac was actually somewhat of a skilled marksman, or that possibly a law enforcement or military background, maybe both, or maybe just someone who was a really good hunter. But I would like to go back to this point of talking about how some law enforcement insider betrayed the confidential informants in the area. Well, there's another layer to that. And if we know that Darlene Ferrin went to Blue Rock Springs to buy drugs, allegedly, right? We can't ask Darlene about this because she's passed away and Mike Michaud is unreliable. But if that's drug-related, and then Lake Herman Road could have been about something to be drug-related, well, then that is a hotbed for criminal activity. Then you have the Paul Stine murder in Presidio Heights, where you have a different type of criminal activity going on, taxi cab robberies. And there's the famous line about how Paul Stine's murder was made to look like a taxi cab robbery, but in reality it's the psychopathic Zodiac killer, right? Well, it's not just made to look like a robbery. His wallet was taken. That means whoever killed Paul Stine also robbed him. That was a murder and a taxi cab robbery. So you have these hotbeds of criminal activity where all the same thing. I mean, very places that would be very accessible to members of the general public. That's why many people question all of the fingerprints that come from the Zodiac Killer mystery, because they say that they say very simply that I mean, they could have been contaminated. They could be somebody else's. Somebody could have shown up. And at Lake Herman Road, as I understand, there is there are no witnesses of the shooter, but there are these two raccoon hunters that are driving by around the time of the shooting, and they see two cars in the parking lot at where David and Betty Lou were ultimately murdered. One of them is just described as dark colored, and another one is David and Betty Lou's car, right? So that eventually they hear something that sounds like a gunshot, but they don't think anything of it because they are raccoon hunters. And you heard in that comment from Mama Wade about how raccoon hunters operate at night. That's why they get used to the things like the pencil flashlights on the guns and such. But I mean, that would have been something that was also would have been done by the raccoon hunters. So they hear these things that sound like gunshots. They don't think anything of it. It's nothing to report. Then they learn about this from the papers and so on. Now, one other point is that something that I originally heard from Thomas Henry Horan, as well as mentioned by Evan from Texas in his videos, is that this guy, Richard Ricky Blank, had a mother who owned a dark-colored car, which was maroon, I think he said in the video. And the thing that Thomas Horan really shared with that is that the way that these criminals operated in the 1960s was they would trade people's cars, they would trade people's driver's licenses. California didn't put the photos on the driver's license until the early 1970s. So if you had any type of little gang like this, somebody can commit a crime in person X's car, and then person Y can just be like, nope, that's not my car. And like they're using different driver's licenses, they're using different vehicles, and they're mixing it up all around because, number one, somebody gets pulled into this web of criminal activity. It's a way to keep people in check. And the second reason is it does give confusing evidence. Be like, hey, do you drive a maroon-colored station wagon? No, I don't. I drive a yellow Lamborghini or something like that. I mean, that's just, a frivolous example, but the point is all the same. They're trading cars, they're trading driver's licenses, so they're using a lot of confusing tactics so they can evade capture. And there could have been something like that happened with Lake Herman Road, and that the shooter was someone who was very frustrated with David Faraday for wanting to rat anybody out who had anything going on with the drug trade at all. Now, there's this big divide. Many people think it's drug-related. Many people think that it was a single perpetrator. What do I think in response to this? Well, for years, of course, I wasn't even thinking about any type of group murder theory. And I was like, okay, there's one Zodiac killer, and he operated somewhat infrequently, but he still operated all the same. I always thought about a single person. But then I began to think more about the possibility of multiple perpetrators. And then for a while, I was really, really sold on the idea that Lake Herman Road was drug-related. And I did, in fact, would have, just given that as my answer. Now I'm definitely more uncertain because when we learn about certain things like the mathematical signatures, the clues that are found in literature, the clues that are found in music, that seems so personal in the Zodiac mystery that it really feels like this is coming from the mind of one person. And I've always said that. Even if there are multiple shooters or there's a stabber at Lake Berryessa who didn't commit all the crimes, there is one central mind behind the planning of the Zodiac killer. And with that being said, one other possibility, if we don't have enough possibilities about how David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were murdered, is that Lake Herman Road was a drug-related crime, and that the Zodiac killer took credit for it, but then Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and the Paul Stein murder were actually committed by the Zodiac killer. And, I mean, if any crime in the canonical Zodiac crimes was not Zodiac-related, I would think that it would be Lake Herman Road, and that this was something that was truly created or cooked up in the summer of 1969, as opposed to the winter solstice of 1968. And I definitely would be open to that possibility. But what do you think about everything that we've shared so far? And if you have any additional information that you would like to put in the comments section below about Lake Herman Road, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, please share something down below. And also, you can view this as like being cut into two different sections. The first is, what do you think David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were doing the night they were murdered? Do you think it is just two people on their first date, that they went to a diner and then they just decided to take a drive and then they want to have a conversation about their future relationship? Or do you think that it's something going in the opposite direction, that there's this confrontation that David has with the other student who's selling drugs, and that student wants to fight David with brass knuckles, but of course I'm sure David wouldn't have known that at the time. They have this planned fight that's going to happen in the afternoon. That guy chickens out, and then he wants to come back in the evening in a way in which he thinks that he can win because he's a coward. And then David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were shot because it was something drug related. What do you say about that? First, what is the motivation for David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen to be in that parking lot at Lake Herman Road? And the second thing is, who do you think did it? Do you think it was a drug-related crime, or do you think it was a calculated move made by the Zodiac Killer? Please share your ideas in the comment section below. I would love to hear anything else you have to say. That's all from me now. See you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.